Good day everyone and welcome to another vlog. Obviously over the Christmas time and getting to New Year, I also took it a little bit slower, but ironically I actually got quite a bit done. So because I'm super excited about this particular thing, I'm starting with this. This is the latest verse image 52 for 2016. Woo! Oh yeah. This one is from Psalm 102, as you can see. But that's not the special thing about this verse image. The special thing about this verse image is this little smokestack over here. Now, while in the verse image it looks a little bit funny, you can look in the project itself and see how it actually moves. So this is the project. This is after slowing the smoke down a little bit because it was moving a bit fast, but this is the way it looks. That is awesome. Now there are a few disadvantages to making smoke this way. For example, it's only on one axis, but I'm sure if you have something that's panning around it or whatever, you can just rotate it slightly as you go around it just to get that effect. So that shouldn't be a problem. You can also use shape keys. You can use... No, I wouldn't recommend shape keys. You can twist it. You can actually twist it. But let's just not get into that right now. So just the way to do this is you would use a cylinder that you would just fan out at the bottom. And you would use two wave modifiers. One big wave. One big wave modifier and one small wave modifier, and both of them use a blend texture to just make sure that it doesn't overly affect the bottom part of it, and then they just interpolate as time goes on. So it's super simple. It's really simple. So I'm going to be showing you guys how to recreate this. All you need to do is add a simple cylinder. Squeeze it in. Add some loop cuts. Make sure you have enough. I added about 55. As you can see on the video, I'll zoom in for this part. You can see the purple lines there. Select the bottom face. Obviously this is a cylinder. Okay. And use proportional editing, set to smooth. Now first we're going to make our gradual expansion throughout the smoke, something like that. And then we're going to do the bottom one and bring it out a little bit more for our little heap. Something like that. Now my problem is God had to show me I was doing it the wrong way. I was modeling it in the reverse, where I would try to shrink this down instead of just pulling this open. So it took quite a bit longer than what I just showed you guys right now. So just tab out, select everything, make sure you're in front of it or the side or whatever, it doesn't matter. And unwrap it by pressing U, project from view bounds. Let me just help you guys by turning on screen gas keys. And now we get to add our wave modifiers. So add a wave modifier. This is going to be our big wave. So as you can see, when you start running it, this is what you get. Now there are a few reasons for this. The primary reason is that it's scaled wrong. So first we're going to apply rotation and scale, and then you'll see immediately it's a different look. It's less intense. But the reason for that is because we scaled the cylinder. So now you need to go into edit mode, rotate it along the x-axis by 90 degrees, minus. It doesn't have to be minus, you just have to make sure that your origin point of your smoke is on the origin of your object. Preferably centering it right there so that if you want to, you can scale it. Now this is going to change because we have to add a texture, and this one is called blend influence. So you see, you're just going to have to move it back like that. Shouldn't have touched it in the first place. Add a color ramp to that. If you want to, you can use it to control the intensity. Okay, getting back there. And if you hit play now, you can see that it's less intense at the start and gets more intense as it goes. You have to make sure that you set it to UV. Okay, now getting back there. Okay, this one has to be in reverse. So let's just get rid of the... No, color ramp stays. Strange, this is actually reacting a little bit weird. So I'm just going to leave it like that because I do want a little bit of smoke movement in the start. Now you can see that it creates these pointy type waves. The way to reduce that is by decreasing the width value. But as you can see, that creates more waves. So what you want to do is you want to try to increase your narrowness, decrease your narrowness, and then increase your width. There you go. So you get this nice thin little smoke line right there. So if you want to, you can just up the height to something like that. It depends on what you want to go for. And then you copy it so that you can produce smaller waves. So just turn this one off. And then we create smaller waves. Upping the narrowness and decreasing the width. Not by that much. Something like that. And now we turn both on. And we decrease the strength of the second one by taking down the height. Now the speed also needs to be reduced, so I'm going to make both 0.1. And tab out, x minus 9, x 180. And there you have it, there's a little smoke cylinder right there. And obviously all you need to do is you just need to texture the smokestack so that it fades out as it goes up. Very simple, very effective. Like I said in the beginning, if you find yourself having to go around the smoke for whatever reason, you can just rotate it slightly along the z-axis as you go around it, since it is already centered. So you do have a solution. But just for the sake of interest, I know you guys may like this one's motion more. I'm just going to scroll through the settings so you guys can copy it. And there you have it. Okay. Next up. Now for a while, you guys know that I've been seeking out about how to recreate that background painterly feel. And this week I actually got to work on that a little bit. That was a lot of fun to do. Now starting with this little bevel line right here. Like I told you guys in the previous vlog, God specifically told me to use the Laplace filter to add more lines to the background. Now in this case I used it to add some of these beveled edges because adding them in the physical model is not that it adds too much detail, it just does not respond the way that the painting would respond. The painting responds as the artist wants it to respond. There doesn't necessarily have to be light there in order for it to respond. I noticed this when I did one of McLelun's tutorials, link in the description, where he did like this parking garage paint over, and he painted those little bevel lines on the pillars, those square pillars, but they did not respond that way in the actual 3D scene when I added light and added that little beveled edge. So I know that it's just not going to respond that way in 3D consistently enough to depend on that only. So this is the Laplace filter, sorry, not node, that adds these little lines right here. As you can see, it also affects any other normal influences that do come in, which is absolutely amazing. It should do that. But the coolest part for me was when God showed me to use the ambient occlusion pass thing. I think I use an environment lighting to do that, to just remove it out of crevices, because it's not supposed to be in crevices. The way I know that is a friend of mine created a tutorial for stairs, with texture painting. Link in the description to that as well. So after working on this pretty much the whole day, I think it was Saturday. I actually got to a result that looks like this. So I am super thankful for this. Now there are a few issues here. Primarily, you can see over here that the normals still are affected by the grass that sort of crosses the edges. You can see it over here as well, the edge of the grass. But the advantage is lines like this over here. Even if you added a beveled edge, you would not be able to see it, because in the 3D pass, just a normal 3D pass, no post-processing, no whatever, this little line over here is physically invisible. It's absolutely physically invisible. So it's just like new. Now there are also there's also another issue, and that is scaling. When you paint textures and the camera moves away from it, technically in relation to the whole screen, you have added more detail. Case in point, look at the size of the patches on the stairs over here and the size of the patches of the wall over here. So you're not going to get that 100% hand-painted look and have it be static. Having said that, I've noticed in some especially animated scenes, that they like to break up the elements. So for example, let's say you're dealing with like a computer room, where everything has been generated and they dissolve or they come up out of the ground or stuff like that. They would still have the painted elements, the hand-painted elements, but the painted elements would move. They would not be animated like a character would be animated, but they can be, like a picture being moved around. So they still do that, giving space for this kind of detail. Having said that, they pretty much just move them side to side, up and down, that sort of thing. But they do use these breakups to defocus, create depth of field, and that sort of thing as well. So you can relax about this little thing, because the Laplace, for example, is not relative to your object size, it's relative to your render image size. So in other words, the lines that are on the steps in the front over here is the exact same thickness as the lines in the background over there. And of course the tree is just the normal edit node that I showed you guys in a previous vlog. Link in the description to that as well. Now, as you guys can see here, I have extended the bottoms of the buildings, just like I said I would in the previous vlog, just to make sure that when the camera goes near them, you can see like a cutoff point above the ground. Because what used to happen is, because of the landscape being quite uneven, for lack of a better term, wanted to say it was hilly, but that's not really a good expression. What would happen is the ground would go below the building line, and the buildings would sometimes look like this one over here, where a part of the building would stick up out of the ground without any kind of extra support or whatever, and it just looked weird. So instead of, just leaving it as is and being kind of ridiculous, The landscape looks like this now, and the buildings, let me just put that over there. Instead of just stopping dead at the ground or just above the ground, I created like this safe area so that they extend way past the surface. So there's no possibility of the corners sticking up out of the ground. So that's also a cool addition. Now this, what you're seeing over here, is a little bit of crowd control. I increased the number of buildings radically because it looked way too sparse for a country that is pretty much maintained by slaves and its own citizens and all that kind of stuff. It was a pretty powerful country for its time. So I increased the amount of buildings, and I also added some servants that are walking. That's what these little circles represent. They represent the servants that are walking. So what that looks like in the final is this. Now there are a few issues here. Primarily, they would walk straight through buildings. Secondly, the feet slide. Thirdly, the clouds moved way too fast. The water was way too fast. The landscape was way too hill country-esque. So that had to be fixed as well. And there are quite a few issues. You can see, for example, over here, these little characters are stuck against the wall that I placed over here to prevent them from going into the Nile. Ironic. But no, it's okay for a crowd that you're going to see from far away, which is pretty much what they are. And you can see when you do animations that come from the distance that they do move. You don't really notice them. You just just notice a slight flickering because of the detail, because they are quite small. Now I don't know if they had buildings like so many floors and whatever, but I'm just reusing an old asset to save on time and energy and getting it finished. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be done as well as I possibly can get it done. I wanted them to move in different directions, like a typical crowd would, but they would not cooperate. That is what you're seeing right here. These little lines that come up out of the ground, that's the wall that's preventing them from going to the Nile. And here's the wind element that's pushing them this way, the wind force field. So as you can see, if you play this back, there they go, little bubbles. Now it's only a very short little animation, short bake. But if you bake the whole thing, the whole crowd would probably move through into the buildings and whatever. Now this did not go as smoothly as it may appear. There were a few difficulties with the crowd, so I'm going to show you what exactly they were. Now this is the first one. As you can see, it's quite comical as they bounce up and down. Now the reason that they bounce up and down is because I assumed that the surface that you place them on is the surface they will be running through. That is not always the case. So what I tried to do is I tried to make them stick to this plane right here, and they just would not. And placing them directly on this one didn't work either, and most of the time they just fell through. It was a nightmare. So what the solution is to reduce the height, not all the way, but reduce most of the height, the default height for the Boid system. Take off flying, take off climbing, and let it its emission surface be just above the landing surface. This reduces this whole bouncing problem immensely. Now, this is not the only issue. I'm going to show you the next one right now. Now, this one was an issue that annoyed me insanely. As you can see, the crowd kind of pops back the whole time. Now, the way to fix this is to make sure that you take out pitch and banking for your Boid particles. You'll find that in the Boid particle brain settings. And of course, up the mass. But my problem is I upped the mass way too much. And then I got this problem. Okay, now pay attention. You can see that originally they're okay, but they're starting to sink into the ground, and then they pop, and then they go into the right direction. And these guys, I think they sink further into the ground, and this guy's feet are already in the ground, and only these guys move with any kind of consistency. So that just had to go. Seriously, it's just ridiculous. And of course, there were other issues. I mean, the animation speed, and what happens if they cross past the Boid brain system, where, for example, they are supposed to walk on the ground, but the ground stops. Then they pop back to their original emission level at the object that they're walking towards. So, there are many issues. There are many issues with the Boid system. It's far from perfect, but it's not unusable. You can certainly use it. And this was just from upping the mass to a good level where they wouldn't sink into the ground, but this was still not just the right setting. See, there they go. This was after adding the wind as well. So you can see there they go. So the important thing to know is that you don't need to add a lot of mass to it, just a little bit, just a very small amount, just so they don't, do that whole flipping thing. So a mass of 2, a mass of 1.5, whatever. You don't have to go to like 300 or whatever. That's like the default I do, Whenever something isn't working quite well, I try extreme values to see what is affecting what. So you can also use that technique. As you can see, the emission plane is about their height above the ground. You can see when they pass through it. Like there. Or here. Over there. This one's going to pass through. Yeah, you get the point. Now, you guys remember I told you that the Nile speed was a problem again. Now, the reason it was a problem again was not because I changed it. It's a problem because I accidentally deleted it from the scene. Now, the reason that happened was because I was working on the compositing for the crowds and all that kind of stuff. Now, I didn't change my compositing setup. It was just a matter of layering everything. And instead of just moving it back to its proper layer, I accidentally deleted it. So what I had to do is I had to go to that previous verse image where Pharaoh was like pointing and angry. I had to use that Nile and stick it back into this scene so I actually would have a Nile. And the problem is this. Not effective, is it? So I did a few speed tests. As you can see, the clouds also move way too fast. So I had to deal with that as well. So I'm going to be showing you the tests one after the other for the Nile until it reaches the speed I was satisfied with. Still too fast, but getting there. And with this one, I was finally like, okay, now the Nile is moving at a reasonable speed. But the scene was still way too big and the clouds were also still moving way too fast. So the first thing was get the clouds moving correctly. See, here's the flickering that I was talking about earlier. You can see the crowd moving. First cloud test, barely any difference whatsoever, even though this is half speed. Okay, next one. And with this one, I was happy because it barely moves. You can only see the big difference when it pops from start to into start. And of course, I reduced the intensity of the smaller leaf animations as well on the palm trees. Now, obviously, we needed to add some shepherds as well. And I noticed that there is a problem with the Nile itself where the clouds did not show up. And the reason for that is because I typically mark the sky dome as non-traceable. It does not show up in reflections. So if you want your sky to show up in your reflections, you have to make sure that it is at least traceable. I think this is for ray tracing. I do speak under correction, but I do think that. Now this is after also adding more buildings on this side of the Nile, shrinking the goats down for scale, and of course adding some shepherds. And I had to scale the entire scene down to get rid of most of the artifacts that come from a very large scene. So this scene size is only 3,000 as opposed to just over 40,000 that it was. It really does make a difference in terms of the clipping. But as you can see over here, I'll zoom in the edit. You can see that the outfits are still breaking up. And I don't know why that is. It may be that the scene is still considerably bigger than Blender wants it to be. I don't know. But it did take me a while to get everything back into working order after editing it, you know. But God's brilliant idea to use an empty to scale everything down worked beautifully. The only things that did not scale down proportionally is the particle systems, but the buildings didn't resize properly and the people did not resize properly, but the palm trees did. So you can resize it without having to resize everything manually. In fact, that's the way I recommend you do that. You know, for example, if you have pillars and all that kind of stuff, you have to make everything in your scene visible and clickable, and only take your top level items and tie them to a new empty and shrink that empty. Then your whole scene comes down to a reasonable level. Now, as you can see over here, I had still used global textures, global coordinates, not global textures, to make sure that everything is correct in relation to one another. So that still worked, but the problem is I just needed to fix the scaling for it. So I worked on that for a while as well. So this is a new render of that typical goat flying animation. These guys just stand here. It's no animation to them. They're just shepherds. So this is what it looks like so far. I did not finish the whole 900 frames. It goes up to about the little shoreline over there. You really do get a sense of how big it is when you see the reflections in the water, as well as, you know, the little goats and the buildings and all that kind of stuff. Much greater sense of scale. And that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed the progress. It's not, you know, like huge amounts of new objects and stuff like that, but it's pretty much a radical change from the characters dissolving, the goats' heads flickering, no clouds in the water, a bunch of stuff. So I hope you guys have an amazing week and an amazing 2017. Have a great one and God bless you.